and we will introduce our first speaker on today's program. And his name is Marco Pacagnella. He is an analyst at the OECD Directorate for Education and Skills, and with a PhD in economics, he specializes in education, labor economics, and applied microeconometrics. And the floor is yours, Marco. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. I'm sharing my slides. I hope you can all see them now in full screen. So thanks a lot for the invitation. I will try to give a brief overview about the results of the second cycle of PIAAC. There's a lot to go through, so I'll try to be quick and not to go over time. I don't know how many of you are familiar with PIAAC, so I will start with a short introduction about what is PIAAC and then present some key results on the importance of literacy and numeracy, the skills landscape in 2023 from the second cycle of PIAAC, and then how things have changed between the first and the second cycle. About 10 years passed between the two. And then a short focus on the role of adult learning programs. But there is much more in PIAAC, so I invite you to consult our website to learn more about PIAAC. So what is PIAAC, or the Survey of Adult Skills? It's a survey of adult skills, as the name said. In cycle 2, we surveyed about 160,000 adults, representing 673 million adults aged between 16 and 65 in 31 countries and economies. They went through an assessment of literacy, numeracy, and adaptive problem solving, as well as a rich background questionnaire, so that we can learn more about their characteristics and link them to their skills proficiency. And the assessment this time around was administered entirely via tablets. So what is this literacy, numeracy, and problem solving that we assess? This is the definition. So literacy is the ability to access, understand, evaluate, and reflect on written text. Numeracy is the ability to access, use, reason critically with mathematical content, information, and ideas represented in multiple ways. And adaptive problem solving, which is a new construct in cycle 2, was not tested in cycle 1, is the ability to achieve one's goal in a dynamic situation in which a method for solution is not immediately available. So we like to think about these skills as really foundational skills. Here the terminology is basic skills. I don't know how much the two definitions align, but we really see them as basic building blocks that people must possess in order to acquire higher order and more technical and subject-specific skills. Just to give you an idea, a few examples of the items that people need to go through. So this is a literacy item. There's a short text, and then there's a question that people must answer on the left-hand side. Based on the information in the article, is each statement below true for bread, crackers, or both? So this is really basic understanding of written text. And this is of moderate to high difficulty, just to give you a sense of the level of the task. This is a very easy numeracy item. People just need to understand a little bit the situation, understand how to use the calculator. There's a mistake in the calculator. They have to spot the mistake. So the mistake is that the width is 52 centimeters, but in the calculator it's 0.52. So they just have to correct it in order to give the right answer. And this is a more complex adaptive problem solving items. People need to perform some task. They have some constraints, so they have to drop their child off at school by 8:30 a.m. They have to buy weekly groceries. They have to be back at home before 9:30 a.m. and they have to show on the map the itinerary that allows them to achieve their objectives within these constraints. So how to interpret the results of the assessment, that's also very important. So in the end, people will get like a numeric score, but I mean, what this score means. So what does 326 points on the PIAAC scale of numeracy mean? So the nice thing about PIAAC is that we have like a description of what people at each level of proficiency, we have up to 5 levels of proficiency, are able to do. And so this is very important for people to understand the results and understand exactly what it means to score at a certain level in PIAAC. For instance, people that score a level 4 in numeracy are able to calculate and interpret rates and ratios, can devise a strategy to compare large data sets, read and interpret multivariate data presented in a single graph. While if you only score at level 1, they can only interpret simple spatial representations or a scale on a map, identify and extract information from a table or graphical representation with a simple number bar chart. And I mean, I'm not going to read through all of this, but this gives you a sense of, so you have descriptions for numeracy, description of this kind for literacy, as well as for adaptive problem solving. So let's jump a little bit now into the data, the results. So the first thing is that we see clearly from the data that these basic skills matter. For instance, if you look at unemployment rate for people that are at different level of proficiency in numeracy, we see that people at low level of skills, level 1 and below, face triple the risk of unemployment on average across the OECD. And then if we zoom a little bit on the Nordic countries, we see that you see in Finland, Sweden, and Norway, there's a similar gap in terms of unemployment rate between high-skilled and low-skilled adults. But in Denmark, you see that the unemployment rate does not vary at all according to numeracy proficiency of adults. Skills also continue to be key drivers of wages, so they are positively related to how much you earn in the labor market over and above formal education. So the blue bars is the estimated effect of one standard deviation increase in years of education. It's about 3 years of education. And the green diamonds is the effect of a one standard deviation increase in numeracy on wages. And you see that, I mean, also for the Nordic countries, of course, the relationship is positive and not very different from the OECD average. So an increase of one standard deviation in numeracy is associated with about 7-8% increase in hourly wages. High-skilled adults also report better health. This is the share of people that report very good or excellent health. And you see that people scoring level 4 and above report higher levels of health than the average. This is true in all Nordic countries as well. And they also feel more able to influence the political process. This is share reporting high levels of political efficacy by levels of proficiency. And again, the relationship is similar in the Nordic countries as to the OECD average. Now, what adults know and can do, what are the basic results of the second cycle of PIAAC? So we see that Finland, Japan, the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden are the best performing countries in all the 3 domains. They consistently score at the top. Finland especially is the highest, this is the first rank in the 3 domains. And Sweden and Norway are consistently at the 3rd and 4th place. Denmark is a bit below, but not by a large amount, and definitely above the OECD average. More than the focusing on the average levels of proficiency for the population, it's maybe more interesting to look at the distribution of people across these different levels of proficiency. Because that, of course, speaks also in terms of inequalities. Finland has the highest share of adults, for instance, at level 5, the top level. Finland and Sweden are the second lowest share of low performers in literacy, and there's a similar pictures for numeracy and adaptive problem solving. Now, how things have changed over the past decade or so. So the overall picture is that we saw that average literacy proficiency has stagnated or declined in most countries or economies. We don't see a lot of improvement. But this is not true for the Nordic countries, which is good news. So in Finland and Denmark are the only 2 countries where average levels of literacy actually improved over time. In Sweden and Norway, the change was not statistically significant, but it's still a positive change. The share of low performers in literacy increased in half of the participating countries, but again, it didn't increase in the Nordic countries. So you have the bar are the share of low performers in cycle 1, and the diamonds is the share of low performers in cycle 2. And you see that for the Nordic countries, the bar and the diamond are more or less at the same level, so no change in the share of low performers. The share of high performers on average remained unchanged or increasing, and it did increase in Finland, Norway, and Denmark. It did not increase in a statistically significant way in Sweden, but it stayed pretty much constant. In numeracy, the picture is a bit more favorable. We see more countries with progresses. And of course, we do see progress in the 4 Nordic countries that we have in the sample. In Sweden, the change is not statistically significant, but again, no particular concerns. Again, the share of low performers in numeracy increased in about 1/3 of the countries that we surveyed. As far as the Nordic countries are concerned, it increased only in Norway, but not in Finland, Sweden, and Denmark. The share of high performers increased in all 4 Nordic countries. If you look a little bit at the distribution of proficiency, we see that declines in average literacy proficiency are largely due to falls among the lowest performing quarter of the population. So if you look across all the 30 countries, we see an increase in inequality with, a larger gap between the top 10% in the distribution and the bottom 10%. But this is not really true for the Nordic countries. So you see, for instance, Finland, Denmark, and Sweden, even those at the bottom of the distribution did not experience declines, although they did worse than the highest performing countries. In Norway, you do see declines at the bottom end of the distribution. Same picture for numeracy. Here, what you see is that you don't see increases in inequality in terms of numeracy proficiency in the Nordic countries. You see that the square and the diamonds are all pretty close. So the change was pretty much the same at different levels of the numeracy distribution. Now, how can we understand a little bit these changes? We looked a little bit into the changes in the demographic composition of the population and changes in the skills of different groups according to age, education, immigrant status, all the information that we have in the PIAAC background questionnaire. Coming to literacy proficiency, the decrease is really concentrated among people with low levels of education, below upper secondary in this case. But again, this is not really true for Nordic countries. For instance, in Sweden, you see that even people below upper secondary did not experience a decline, but people with tertiary degree experience a small decline. In Finland and Denmark, you see the more normal pattern with slight declines for people with below upper secondary and positive increases for people with higher level of education. And this is even more evident in Norway, where you have a strong decline for people with below upper secondary and essentially no change with people at upper secondary and tertiary education. This is restricted to people between 25 and 65 years old. So the positive increase that you see for Norway overall essentially is because the skills of people between 16 and 24-year-olds increased. In terms of age, the decline in literacy is observed mainly among older adults. What happened? Okay, sorry. How can I go back? But again, that's what I said before. In Norway, you see a very large increase in skills of the younger adults, 16 to 24. While in Sweden, the increase is mainly among people aged between 55 and 65. Looking at immigrant status, some countries saw a decline in literacy proficiency among immigrants. But again, that's not the case in the Nordic countries. In Finland, Denmark, and Sweden, actually, the foreign-born adults with foreign-born parents experience an increase in their literacy proficiency, more than the native adults. In Norway, there's essentially no increase in the skills of foreign-born adults and positive increase in the skills of the natives. Now, if we try to put all these things together, essentially you can kind of try to decompose the change in average proficiency for the population in terms of changes in the composition of the population and changes in the proficiency of people belonging to different groups. So what you see is that levels of educational attainments increase pretty much everywhere, and so they positively contributed to changes. But you see that also that at the same time, the change in the proficiency of adults with lower secondary education, below upper secondary education, deteriorated with respect to the proficiency of tertiary adults, and that kind of dragged down the results for Denmark, Norway, and Finland, but not for Sweden. But in Sweden, you see that the green bar is positive. It means that the proficiency of adults with low levels of education, they relatively increased with respect to adults with tertiary levels of education. The impact of migration is much smaller. You do see an increase in the number of immigrants in many countries. That's the blue bar. As immigrants on average have lower level of proficiency, they tend to drag down the average level of proficiency of the population. But you see that the effect overall is very small. And in Denmark, you see not only small changes in the composition by immigrant background, but you also see a positive change in the proficiency of immigrants relative to the native population. Let me close with some words on the role for adult learning programs. So maybe some of these good performance of the Nordic countries is due to their system of adult learning. And we do find evidence for this. So participation in formal and non-formal adult learning is highest in the Nordic countries and other English-speaking countries. It's above the OECD average. You see very high rates of participation for Norway, Finland, Denmark, a bit lower for Sweden. Adult learning has stagnated or declined over the past decades, but again, a bit less so in the Nordic countries. It has stayed constant in Norway and Finland, and declined slightly in Denmark and Sweden. And the other thing that you see for the Nordic countries is that the rate of participation for older adults, age 55 to 65, has increased relative to the participation of younger adults between age of 25 and 34. What next about PIAAC? So apart from the overall international report that we released in December last year, we had a planned series of thematic reports. Next week, we are releasing a thematic report on social and emotional skills. I invite you to check it out. It's going to be very interesting. It's the first time this second cycle that we assess the social emotional skills of adults in PIAAC. There's a new round of PIAAC planned with 7 new countries, results expected in 2029. And finally, I want to draw your attention to Education and Skills Online, which is a flexible online tool to administer an assessment linked to PIAAC, and that institutions will be able to freely access sometimes next year. We're working on that. You will have a fully customizable questionnaire and the possibility of administer the assessment to adults in your constituency with results that will be comparable to the overall results for the population as you have them in PIAAC. It's 12:29, so I'm done. Thanks a lot. This is the link to the OECD PIAAC website in case you are curious and want to find something more about PIAAC. And of course, I'll try to have a look at the Q&A and answer as many questions as I can.